How's it hanging, everybody? My name is Steve. This is Horns Held High, and today I am reviewing Post-Apocalypto by comedy rock band Tenacious D. Now, this album was released on November 2nd, 2018 on Columbia Records, and in addition to releasing this album, Tenacious D put out a 6-part animated series on YouTube that coincides with the album. But fun fact, the animated series is twice as long as the album, which only clocks in at about half an hour. Tenacious D also just began a short tour through the United States that's going to be running through the end of this year. So, Post-Apocalypto. Oh boy. What's good about it? Tenacious D are back? Yay! I enjoyed Tenacious D as much as the next guy, but this album was kind of a disappointment. The only good thing I found about it was the fact that Tenacious D was back with new material. So let's just dive into the bad stuff now. As far as the album goes, there's no metal in sight as far as I'm concerned. Especially for a band with a popular song called The Metal, and for a band that won a metal Grammy in 2014. Granted, it was for a cover of a Ronnie James Dio song, but they still won a metal Grammy. And the fact that their most recent album has no metal on it whatsoever is kind of shocking to me, honestly. Because even their last effort, Rise of the Phoenix, I felt they had some pretty, hard rockin' songs on there. Something I could enjoy as far as a hard rock metal perspective goes. Another issue I had with this album was that I wasn't huge on the ordering of the tracks, because the tracks tend to go one song, one track of talking, one song, one track of talking. I would have much preferred that the songs were all kind of next to each other, or at least if they had a couple songs and then talking, a couple songs and then talking, that would have been fine too. But their ordering of one song, talk, it just kind of ruined the momentum of the songs for me, and it really didn't do anything for me, honestly. And the overarching theme of this album is that it tells a story about JB, Jack Black, and KG, Kyle Gass, surviving a nuclear apocalypse and all of the characters and situations they meet and get into along the way. But for me, by the end of the album, it kind of lost me. I didn't really know what was happening. To be honest, I was a little bored by the end of the album. And as a whole, the album really didn't feel that engaging as far as from a listening perspective. The songs, they all kind of blend together, but I'll get into that in a minute. And I had lost interest by the end of the album. So, even though this album tells a story that doesn't make a lot of sense, now granted, Tenacious D is a comedy band, a lot of their music is supposed to be nonsensical, lighthearted, not make a lot of sense. But this album tried to tell a story that didn't make sense in a bad way. The overall mood of the album, nonsensical, comedic, and lighthearted, as Tenacious D should be. But the story that they were trying to tell throughout this album, I just didn't find it very engaging. It was a very lackluster story, and by the end of the album, the story had bored me, and I didn't really care about the characters, and I wasn't interested in the story anymore, to be quite honest. So when I listened to this album, I was more focused on the songs of the album, not as much the talking portions of the album. I was more focused on what the songs of the album were and what they sounded like, and how I felt they all blended together. Now, unfortunately, the songs blend together almost a little too well, to the point where I couldn't really tell the songs apart except for like 2 or 3 of them, and even the 2 or 3 I could tell apart weren't super great. The only 3 songs that I could really tell that stood out from the rest of them were Daddy Ding Dong, Woman Time, and the JB rap. Overall, the songs are light and acousticy. There's a flute solo in there somewhere, and it just didn't work for me overall. Those 3 songs that stood out on the album, they weren't great either, but at least they were audibly different enough from the other songs on the album that I could say, oh, this is different, not good, but different. In comparison to other albums put out by Tenacious D, I actually did the math. There's actually just as many talking tracks on this album, Post-Apocalypto, as there are on Tenacious D's debut album. The difference is, the talking bits on Tenacious D's debut album felt more like individual comedy bits, whereas the talking points on this album are trying to tell a story. The talking tracks on Tenacious D's debut album felt like individual comedy bits, which most of those were pretty entertaining to me. But the talking tracks on this album, Post-Apocalypto, they're telling a story, but that story is, and I emphasize this phrase, very loosely narrated. Half the time, I'm not quite sure what's happening, and like I said earlier, by the end of the story, I was lost, and frankly, I didn't care. When it came to the songs on this album, I was really hoping for some good comedy songs, or at least something maybe resembling metal that I could enjoy and maybe get a laugh out of. But no, none of the songs are that funny, and none of them sound like metal. I could call two of them hard rock at best. So despite all that, I did manage to pull out a best song out of the bunch. So the best song, for me, was Daddy Ding Dong, because it was only one of two songs on the album that to me even closely, somewhat remotely resembled hard rock. For me, it also stood out because the melody was different than the other songs. It was more amplified than the other songs, and the riffs they were using stood out to me as opposed to what they were using on the other songs. And as far as least enjoyable song goes, gonna have to go with the half a song march. The reason I call it half a song is because it starts out as a talking track but ends as a song. And I'm not going to repeat the lyrics here, but the lyrics of March I could very easily see being taken out of context in the PC world we live in 2018, because the lyrics have to do with KKK members. Now, granted, it's making fun of them to a certain degree, and it is Tenacious D, who's a comedy band, but even on initial listening of this track, my immediate thought was, I could easily see somebody taking these lyrics out of context, or even editing them out of the song and putting them into some kind of propaganda video or something like that. So this song was on the brink of cringeworthy for me. When all is said and done, with all the negatives, but the positive, that the fact that Tenacious D has put out new music and they're touring again, I'm going to give this album 2 horns out of 10. It's not good. Literally anything else from Tenacious D is better. And I highly recommend anything else from Tenacious D. So again, 2 out of 10 horns for Tenacious D's album, Post-Apocalypto. What did you think of this album from Tenacious D? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, and remember to always keep your horns held high, and I'll see you in the next one.